What's going on, guys? Welcome to Danny Wright's Dragon Stories. In a world where dragons and humans unite, kindness becomes strength, and friendship creates legend. So let's dive into the story.
The smell of fresh bread filled the small shop as David Coleman pulled another batch from the oven. Flour dusted his apron, and his hands moved with the easy rhythm of 20 years spent baking. Outside the window, the red dust of the colony world drifted past in lazy clouds. Redstone was not much to look at, but it was home to 5,000 humans who had built their lives under the protection of the Draconis Empire. David had just finished arranging the morning pastries when the sky went dark. Not the darkness of clouds or storms. This was the darkness of something massive blocking out the sun. Through the shop window, David watched as people in the street stopped and looked up. Some screamed. Others dropped their bags and ran for cover. The dragon landed in the town square. Not just any dragon. Emperor Brasthar himself, ruler of 300 worlds, descended with wings that seemed to stretch from one end of the colony to the other. His scales gleamed like polished bronze, and his eyes burned with an inner fire. The ground shook when he touched down. Buildings trembled. Car alarms started wailing across the entire settlement. David wiped his hands on his apron and walked outside. Other shopkeepers were peeking out from doorways, too afraid to step into the open. The colony governor was running toward the square, still pulling on his jacket, his face pale with panic. The emperor's voice rolled across the town like thunder. I seek the best makers of food among the humans of this world. Governor Wells stumbled to a stop and bowed, so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. Your Imperial Majesty, we are honored beyond measure by your presence. If you require provisions, our warehouses contain. I do not require provisions. The Emperor's eyes swept across the gathered crowd. More humans were emerging now, drawn by curiosity despite their fear. My son is dying. No physician in my empire can cure him. No chef can make him eat. I will give all the bakeries in my capital city to anyone who can feed Prince Copperval and restore his strength. The crowd murmured. All the bakeries in the imperial capital? That had to be worth billions. Maybe more. David's neighbor, Richard from the hardware store, nudged him hard in the ribs. David, that's you. You're the best baker on Redstone. Prince Copperval is a dragon, David said quietly. Dragons don't eat bread, but all those bakeries, they eat meat. Raw meat and metals. What would I even make for him? Governor Wells was stammering something about consulting with the colony's medical staff when David heard himself speak up. I'll try. The words came out before he could stop them. The entire square went silent. Even the emperor turned his massive head to focus on David. You. The dragon's voice carried clear skepticism. You are a maker of food. I'm a baker, yes. David stepped forward, very aware of how small he looked next to the emperor. I can't promise anything, Your Majesty, but I'd like to try to help your son. Dragons do not eat bread. Human. I know. But my grandmother used to say that sometimes the sickness isn't in the body. It's somewhere else. And when that happens, regular food won't help anyway. David met the emperor's burning gaze without flinching. If your physicians can't find anything wrong and your chefs can't make him eat, maybe it's not that kind of sick. The emperor stared at David for a long moment. His tail swept back and forth, carving grooves in the street. Finally, he lowered his head until one enormous eye was level with David's face. You understand you may fail. I understand. And if you fail, my son may die. I understand that too, Your Majesty. Then you will come to the Imperial Palace. Now, the Emperor shifted his body, lowering one massive foreleg. Climb onto my back. David heard Richard gasp behind him. Governor Wells looked like he might faint. No human had ever ridden a dragon. It simply wasn't done. Dragons were not beasts of burden. They were the rulers of the galaxy. But David thought about the Emperor's voice when he said his son was dying. He had heard that kind of desperation before, in the voices of parents whose children were sick. It sounded the same no matter what species you were. He climbed onto the Emperor's back, finding handholds between the massive bronze scales. The dragon's body radiated heat like a furnace. Hold tight, human baker. The Emperor launched into the sky with such force that David's stomach dropped to his feet. The colony fell away below them, becoming a tiny cluster of buildings surrounded by endless red desert. Then they were above the clouds, and the Emperor's wings beat with a rhythm that ate up the miles. David held on and tried not to think about how high up they were. Instead, he thought about his grandmother, who had taught him to bake when he was 6 years old. She used to say that good bakers didn't just feed bodies, they fed souls. When someone was sad, they needed comfort food. When someone was lonely, they needed something that made them feel at home. When someone was grieving, they needed something that honored their pain. The problem was David had no idea what comfort food looked like for a dragon. Below them, the landscape changed from red desert to rolling green hills to snow-capped mountains. They flew for 3 hours without stopping. Finally, David saw it on the horizon. The Imperial Palace, a structure of crystal mountains and flowing gold that stretched across an entire valley. The Emperor descended toward the largest building, where hundreds of dragons waited in the courtyard. They all looked up as their Emperor arrived with a human on his back. David climbed down on shaking legs. The Emperor's advisors immediately surrounded him, a wall of scaled faces showing expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. "This is the human who will attempt to feed the prince," the Emperor announced. "Take him to Copperval's chambers. He is to be given anything he requests." An older dragon with silver scales stepped forward. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious. A human? A maker of bread? The prince requires someone who can help him." The Emperor cut him off. "Your expertise has failed. The physicians have failed. Now we try something different." His eyes found David again. "Save my son, human baker. Prove that your kind has wisdom we have overlooked." David nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. A dragon guard gestured for him to follow, and he walked in the palace wondering what he had just gotten himself into. The palace corridors were impossibly tall, built for beings who could spread their wings indoors. David followed the silver scale guard through halls lined with portraits of ancient dragon emperors and trophy rooms filled with the spoils of conquered worlds. Servants stopped to stare at him, their reptilian eyes tracking his movement with open curiosity. "The prince has not eaten in 16 days, the guard said without looking back. "Our best healers have examined him. They find no illness, no poison, no injury. Yet he grows weaker each day." "Has anything happened recently?" David asked. "Anything that might have upset him?" The guard stopped walking and turned to face David. "Dragons do not get upset. We're not weak like mammals. We do not allow emotions to control us. Right?" "Of course." David decided not to argue. "Can I see him alone?" "Absolutely not. The prince is heir to the throne. You will be supervised at all times." "Then I probably can't help him." David kept his voice polite but firm. "If he's got guards watching everything he does, he won't talk to me honestly. And if he won't talk to me, I can't figure out what's wrong." The guard's scales rippled with irritation. "You would dare make demands? I'm not demanding anything. I'm just telling you how this works." David met the dragon's eyes. "You want me to help? Then let me do it my way. If it doesn't work, you can execute me or whatever you do to humans who fail. But at least give me a real chance." The guard studied him for a long moment. Then she turned and continued walking. "Wait here." She disappeared through a massive golden door. David stood in the corridor, very aware that he was completely alone in a palace full of dragons who probably saw him as either a curiosity or a threat. Maybe both. The guard emerged 10 minutes later. "The Emperor has granted your request. You may see the prince alone. But know this, human, if you harm him in any way, your death will be slow." "Understood." The guard pushed open the door and gestured him inside. David stepped into a room that could have fit his entire bakery 3 times over. The walls were covered in star charts and military commendations. Shelves held books and strange alien artifacts. A massive bed sat in one corner, but the prince was not on it. Copperval lay curled on the floor beneath a window, his body so still that David thought for a moment he might already be dead. Then he saw the shallow rise and fall of the dragon's breathing. The prince was smaller than David expected, still larger than a horse, but nothing like his father's immense size. His copper scales had lost their shine. His eyes were closed. "Prince Copperval." David approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. My name is David. I'm a baker from the human colony. The prince's eyes opened. They were a dull bronze color, like tarnished metal. You're wasting your time. I am not hungry. That's okay. I didn't bring any food. David sat down on the floor a few feet away from the prince. I just wanted to talk. I have nothing to say. That's okay too. I can talk enough for both of us. David leaned back against the wall. Your father flew all the way to my planet just to find someone who could help you. That's a lot of effort. He must care about you a lot. The prince said nothing. So here's what I'm thinking, David continued. The doctors say you're not sick. The chefs say you won't eat. But 16 days without food? That's not about being picky. That's about something else. He paused. My grandmother used to say that sometimes people stop eating because they've got pain that food can't fix. Pain on the inside. The kind that makes everything taste like dust. Copperval's eyes flickered toward David, then away. I had that once, David said, when my grandmother died. She raised me after my parents were gone. She taught me everything about baking. And when she died, I couldn't eat for days. Everything tasted wrong. Nothing mattered. He picked at a loose thread on his apron. People kept telling me I needed to eat to keep my strength up. They didn't understand that I didn't want strength. I just wanted her back. The prince's breathing changed slightly. His tail twitched. But here's the thing, David said softly. Eventually I realized something. She wouldn't have wanted me to stop eating. She spent her whole life teaching me to make food that brought people joy. If I stopped eating, if I stopped baking, it would be like saying her lessons didn't matter. He looked at the prince. Who did you lose? Copperval went very still. For a long moment, David thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the prince said, Silveron, was he a friend? We trained together, fought together. He was smaller than the other dragons, weaker. They said he would never amount to anything. The prince's voice cracked slightly, but he was brave, braver than anyone. 2 months ago, there was a border skirmish with raiders. Silveron took a hitman for a transport ship full of civilians. He saved 300 lives, and he died. I'm sorry, David said. Dragons do not mourn. Copperval's voice turned bitter. We honor the fallen and move forward. That is our way. Silveron died with honor. I should celebrate his courage, not weaken myself with grief. That is what my tutors say, what the court physicians say, what everyone says. What do you say? The prince looked at David with eyes that held too much pain for something so young. I say that I miss him. Every day, every moment, and I do not know how to make it stop hurting. David nodded slowly. In human culture, when someone dies, we have something called a wake. We gather together and we share food and we tell stories about the person we lost. We let ourselves feel sad. We let ourselves cry. We let ourselves miss them. He met the prince's gaze. Because missing someone isn't weakness. It's proof that they mattered. That is not the dragon way. I know, but maybe the dragon way isn't working for you right now. Copperval stared at him. Then, to David's shock, a single tear rolled down the dragon's scaled face. It glowed with internal heat, leaving a faint trail of steam. I am weak, the prince whispered. No, David said firmly. You're grieving. There's a difference. The prince closed his eyes. More tears came, silent and hot. David stayed where he was, not speaking, just being present. He had seen this before in humans. The moment when the dam finally breaks and the pain comes flooding out. After a long time, Copperval's tears slowed. He looked at David with exhausted eyes. Even if you are right, even if this is grief and not weakness, what difference does it make? I still cannot eat. Food still tastes like ash. Then we need to make you different food, David said. Food that honors Silveron. Food that says his life mattered and his death meant something. Food that feeds your heart, not just your body. The prince's expression showed something that might have been hope. Can you make such food? I can try, David said, but I'll need your help. Tell me about Silveron. What did he love? What made him laugh? What was his favorite thing in the world? And slowly, haltingly, the prince began to talk. David spent 3 hours listening to Prince Copperval talk about Silveron. He learned that the smaller dragon had loved the stars, that he collected maps of distant galaxies, that he made terrible jokes that somehow always made the prince laugh. He learned that Silveron wore a pin shaped like a star on his uniform, and that his favorite metal to consume was silver because it reminded him of moonlight. That'd be why the time David left the prince's chambers, he had the beginning of an idea. It was insane. It probably wouldn't work, but it was the only thing he could think of. The imperial kitchens were chaos. Dragon chefs moved between massive ovens that could roast entire animals whole. Butchers prepared haunches of meat that weighed more than David did. Metals were being melted down in crucibles. Gold and copper and iron prepared for the emperor's table. The head chef, a dragon named Bronzecar, looked at David like he was a particularly annoying insect. The emperor says we must give you anything you require. So speak quickly and then leave. We have work to do. I need access to your pantries, David said. All of them. And I need to know if you have any earth ingredients. Earth ingredients. Bronzecar sneeved eat smoke. Why will we keep food from your backward little planet? Because trade ships stop here all the time, David said patiently. And humans live on a dozen worlds in your empire. Someone must have brought earth food through here. Bronzecar looked annoyed, but gestured to a smaller dragon. Show him the storage chambers. Let him waste his time looking. The storage chambers were enormous, filled with ingredients from 1,000 different worlds. David searched through them systematically, ignoring the dragon's servants who watched him with obvious skepticism. He found what he was looking for in a sealed container marked as a gift from the human colony on New Terra. 3 jars of honey. Real earth honey, dark and golden and perfect. He also found wheat flour, though it was stored with other exotic grains that dragons kept for variety in the feeds of their livestock. He found yeast. He found salt. The basics were there, buried among ingredients he didn't recognize. Now came the hard part. I need silver, David said to Bronzecar. Pure silver, not alloyed with anything. And I need it ground into dust fine enough to mix into food. Every dragon in the kitchen stopped working. Bronzecar stared at him. You want to feed the prince silver? Yes. Silver is precious. It is consumed only during ceremonies of great importance. This is important, David said. The prince is dying. If I want to save him, I need silver. Bronzecar's eyes narrowed. If you are wasting imperial resources on some human foolishness, then you can feed me to whatever dragons eat when they're angry, David finished. But right now, I need silver dust. Also copper dust. And gold leaf if you have it. Bronzecar looked like he wanted to argue, but the emperor's orders were clear. He dispatched servants to fetch the metals. While David waited, he began measuring out flour and water, preparing the basic dough. The dragon chefs watched him with barely concealed disdain. Bread, one of them muttered. He is making bread. This is the human's great solution. David ignored them. He had learned long ago that baking required focus. You could not rush it. You could not force it. You had to trust the process and let the work speak for itself. The silver arrived first, already ground to a powder so fine it looked like gray dust. Copper came next, and finally thin sheets of gold leaf that gleamed in the kitchen lights. David mixed the silver dust into a portion of his dough, carefully measuring the amount. Too much, and it might be dangerous. Too little, and it would not carry the symbolism he needed. He shaped the dough into small cakes, each one no larger than a human fist. Into each cake, he pressed a tiny amount of copper dust at the center, like a heart. Then he brushed the tops with honey before baking them. The dragon chefs had gathered closer now, their curiosity overcoming their contempt. Bronzecar watched David work with an expression that might have been grudging respect. What are you making? The head chef finally asked. Comfort food, David said. Food that means something beyond nutrition. Food is fuel. That is all. For you, maybe. For humans, food is memory. Food is culture. Food is how we say things we cannot put into words. David pulled the first batch from the oven. The small cakes had risen perfectly, their surfaces golden brown. The honey had caramelized slightly, and the scent that filled the kitchen was unlike anything the dragons had smelled before. The Bronzecar leaned closer, his nostrils flaring. What is that smell? Honey. It comes from insects on Earth called bees. They make it from flower nectar. David carefully transferred the cakes to a cooling rack. It has complexity, sweetness, but also depth. Every batch of honey tastes slightly different depending on what flowers the bees visited. And the silver? Bronzecar asked, his voice softer now. Silver for remembrance, copper for friendship, gold for honor. David pulled out a sheet of parchment and began writing in careful letters. Each ingredient represents something about the dragon the prince lost. The honey represents sweetness and life. The bread itself represents sustenance and comfort. He finished writing and read it over. The note explained everything, each ingredient's meaning laid out clearly. It was not enough to make the food. The prince needed to understand what he was eating. David arranged the cakes on a tray. He placed the note beside them. Then he used the gold leaf to shape small stars on top of each cake. Remembering what Copperval had said about Silveron's pinned up Bronzecar, was staring at the tray with an expression David could not read. Finally, the head chef said, I have cooked for 3 emperors across 150 years. Never have I seen anyone prepare food this way, with meaning in every ingredient, with intention in every shape. He paused. If this does not work, if the prince still refuses to eat, it will not be because your effort was insufficient. Thank you, David said. Do not thank me yet. The imperial advisors are furious that a human is attempting what our finest minds could not achieve. If you succeed, you will have enemies in this court. If you fail, you may not leave this palace alive. David picked up the tray. His hand was steady despite the fear curling in his stomach. Then I better not fail. He carried the tray back through the palace corridors, following the silver-scale guard who had brought him to the kitchens. Servants stopped to watch him pass. Word had spread through the palace that the human was making his attempt to feed the prince. When they reached Copperval's chambers, David paused outside the door. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and stepped inside. The prince was still on the floor, but he had moved to watch the sunset through the window. He turned when David entered, his dull bronze eyes focusing on the tray. I brought something for you, David said. Something to honor Silveron. Prince Copperval lifted his head as David approached. The dragon's nostrils flared slightly at the scent of the honey cakes, but his expression remained guarded. David set the tray down between them and sat cross-legged on the floor. Before you eat anything, I want to tell you a story. Back on Earth, when someone dies, humans have different ways of remembering them. Some people plant trees. Some people write songs. My grandmother taught me that the best way to honor someone is to share a meal in their memory. The prince looked at the small cakes on the tray. Those are quite small. Dragons consume much larger portions. These are not meant to fill your stomach. They are meant for something else. David picked up the note he had written. Each cake has silver dust mixed into the dough. Silver for remembrance, because Silveron's name carried that metal, and he loved how it looked like moonlight. At the center of each cake is copper dust for friendship, for the bond you shared. The gold stars on top are for his honor, for the courage he showed saving those civilians. And the honey, David paused. The honey is for all the sweetness he brought to your life. All the moments that mattered. All the times he made you laugh. Copperval stared at the cakes. His breathing had become uneven. You made food that carries his memory. I tried. On Earth, we believe that when you eat food made with love and intention, it becomes part of you. If you eat these cakes, Silveron's memory becomes part of your strength. Not something that weakens you, but something that helps you keep going. David met the prince's eyes. You told me that Silveron was brave. He saved 300 lives. Do you think he would want you to waste away? Or would he want you to live, to keep fighting, to honor what he died protecting? The prince's claws scraped against the stone floor. I did not know how to live without him. You do not have to know right now. You just have to take the first step. Eat one cake. Honor his memory by choosing to survive another day. That is all I am asking. For a long moment, Copperval did not move. Then, slowly, he reached out and picked up one of the small cakes. It looked tiny in his clawed hand. He brought it close to his face, breathing in the scent of honey and baked bread. Tell me about him, David said softly. Tell me your favorite memory of Silveron. The prince's voice cracked as he spoke. We were younglings, barely able to fly. The older dragons were racing through the canyon near the palace. Silveron wanted to race too, even though he was too small. They laughed at him. They said he would never be fast enough. Copperval's eyes were distant, lost in memory. But Silveron did not care what they said. He launched himself off the cliff and flew through that canyon faster than any of them. He crashed at the end, tumbled through 3 trees, and broke his wing. But he was laughing the entire time. He sounded like he was something special, David said. He was. The prince looked down at the cake in his hand. Then, with shaking movements, he took a bite. David held his breath while Copperval chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. The metals would taste strange to him, David knew, but dragons consumed metals regularly. The honey and bread would be the foreign elements. The prince swallowed and closed his eyes. It tastes like, Copperval's voice wavered. It tastes like sunlight, like memory, like everything I've been trying not to feel. That means it is working, David said gently. The prince took another bite, then another. Tears began running down his scaled face again, those strange hot tears that steamed in the cool palace air. But this time he did not stop eating. He finished the first cake and reached for a second. Tell me another memory, David prompted. Tell me about the time that made you laugh the hardest. Through tears, Copperval told stories. About Silveron trying to cook and nearly burning down the barracks. About the time they snuck out of the palace to see a meteor shower. About inside jokes and shared secrets and all the tiny moments that make up a friendship. With each story, he ate another cake. That be why the time the tray was empty. The prince was still crying, but his scales had begun to shine slightly brighter. Color was returning to his eyes. The door burst open. Imperial guards rushed in, followed by the silver-scaled advisor David had seen before. And behind them all, Emperor Brastar himself. The emperor's eyes went immediately to his son, taking in the tears, the empty tray, the way Copperval was sitting up for the first time in days. His massive head swung toward David, and for a moment David thought he had made a terrible mistake. You made my son weep, the emperor said, his voice low and dangerous. Father, wait, Copperval started to say. You were brought here to feed him, not to break him further. The emperor took a step closer to David. The temperature in the room seemed to rise. Explain yourself, human, before I decide your fate. David stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. Your Majesty, your son was not sick. He was grieving. You cannot cure grief with medicine. You cannot feed grief with normal food. Grief requires acknowledgement. It requires permission to feel pain. It requires... He paused, choosing his words carefully. It requires the understanding that missing someone is not weakness. It is love that has nowhere to go. Dragons do not grieve, the silver-scaled advisor hissed. We are above such weakness. With respect, David said, and he did not look away from the emperor. That is a lie you tell yourselves. And it nearly killed your son. The room went deadly silent. Several guards reached for their weapons. The advisor looked like he might explode with rage. But Copperval pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly but standing nonetheless. Father, please listen to him. The prince's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. David showed me something our culture has forgotten. Strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is facing pain and choosing to keep living anyway. Silveron died protecting others because he loved them. If I waste away because I refuse to admit I loved him too, then his sacrifice means nothing. Emperor Brastar looked between his son and David. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, the emperor spoke, his voice quieter than before. You ate, he said to his son. I ate, Copperval confirmed, and I want to eat again. But not because I am hungry for food, because David taught me that eating can be an act of remembrance. A way to honor those we have lost. The emperor's gaze returned to David. You refused to let my son hide from his pain. You forced him to face what he was feeling. There was something in the dragon's voice that David could not identify. Why? Because hiding from pain does not make it go away, David said simply. It just makes it grow in the dark. I learned that when I lost my grandmother, and I learned that the only way through grief is through it. Not around it, not over it, through it. The emperor stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly he nodded. You will be rewarded as promised. All the bakeries in my capital city will be given to you. But David had been thinking about this for the past 3 hours, and he had realized something important. Your Majesty, he said, I do not want the bakeries. Every dragon in the room went still. The silver-scaled advisor looked at David like he had lost his mind. Even Copperval seemed shocked. Emperor Brasthar's eyes narrowed. You do not want a reward? Then what game are you playing, human? No game, Your Majesty. I just realized that owning hundreds of bakeries would not make me happy. Managing properties across your capital, dealing with business operations I do not understand, living in a place where I do not know anyone. David shook his head. That is not the life I want. That is not why I became a baker. Then you are a fool, the silver advisor snapped. You have been offered wealth beyond imagination, and you refuse it. I refuse wealth I would not know what to do with, David corrected. But I do have a different request, if your Majesty will hear it. The Emperor's tail swept across the floor in a gesture David could not interpret. Speak. I want to open one bakery. Just one. Here in the imperial capital. A place where anyone can come, dragon or otherwise, to remember those they have lost. A place where food carries meaning beyond nutrition. David glanced at Copperval, then back to the Emperor. Your son is not the only one who has lost someone. I would bet there are thousands of dragons in your empire who are carrying grief they have never been allowed to express. Let me create a place where they can. This is absurd, the silver advisor said. Dragons do not need a human to teach them how to mourn. We have our own traditions. Do you? David asked quietly. Because from what I have seen, your tradition is to pretend grief does not exist until it kills you from the inside out. The advisor hissed and took a step forward, but the Emperor raised one massive claw. Enough. He studied David with those burning eyes. You understand what you are proposing? You would live here in my capital, surrounded by beings who could kill you without effort. You would abandon your home, your community, everything familiar, for the chance to bake bread. Not just bread, David said. Food that heals. Food that helps. My grandmother taught me that a baker's job is not to make people full. It is to make them feel at home, to give them comfort when life is hard, to remind them that even in the darkest times, there are still things worth savoring. He paused. I think your empire needs that. I think your people have forgotten how to be soft with each other, how to admit that sometimes we all need comfort. Copperval moved to stand beside his father. Though he was still weak, there was determination in his stance. Father, let him do this. Please. What he taught me today, it saved my life. If there are others who are suffering the way I was suffering, they deserve the same chance. The Emperor looked at his son. Something passed between them, some communication that David could not understand. Finally, Brasthar turned back to David. You will have your bakery. One shop, in the craftsman district near the palace. The building will be provided. You will have access to any ingredients you require. The Emperor's voice took on a warning tone. But you will also accept a condition. What condition? My son will work as your apprentice. David blinked. Copperval looked equally surprised. The silver advisor made a choking sound. Your Majesty, the advisor protested. The prince cannot work in a bakery. He is heir to the throne. He has duties, responsibilities. His education nearly killed him. The Emperor interrupted. We have trained him in strategy and warfare and diplomacy. We have filled his mind with knowledge of how to rule. But we have not taught him the most important thing. The Emperor's gaze softened as he looked at his son. We have not taught him how to live with loss, how to carry grief without letting it destroy him, how to honor memory while still moving forward. Father, Copperval said softly, I do not know how to bake. Then you will learn. You will spend 3 months in David's bakery. You will work alongside him. You will understand what he understands about comfort and healing and why food can sometimes cure what medicine cannot. The Emperor looked back at David. You will teach him? David thought about everything this meant. Teaching a dragon prince to bake. Spending 3 months working with someone who had probably never needed dough in his life. The culture clash. The mistakes. The challenges. I will teach him, David said. But he has to actually work. No special treatment because he is royalty. No guards standing over him telling him he is doing things wrong. If he is going to be my apprentice, he follows my rules in my bakery. The silver advisor looked like he was going to have a stroke. Even some of the guards appeared uncomfortable. But the emperor surprised them all by laughing, a deep rumbling sound that shook the windows. Agreed. When my son is in your bakery, you have authority over him. The emperor's eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. This will be good for him. He has been surrounded by those who bow and scrape his entire life. Working for someone who sees him as just another apprentice will teach him humility. Copperval looked between his father and David, and despite everything, a small smile appeared on his face. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, David said. Before dawn. Bakers keep early hours. The prince's smile faltered slightly. Before dawn. That is when we do our best work. The world is quiet. It is just you and the dough and the ovens. You learn a lot about yourself when you bake in those silent hours before the rest of the world wakes up. David offered his hand. Do we have an agreement, apprentice? Copperval looked at the hand, clearly uncertain what to do with it. David realized that dragons probably did not shake hands. But the prince extended one claw carefully and touched David's palm, sealing the agreement in whatever way made sense to them both. We have an agreement, Copperval said. The emperor nodded once. Then it is settled. David Coleman of Redstone, you will have your bakery. Copperval, heir to the throne of the Draconis Empire, you will have your teacher. He looked between them both. I expect great things from this arrangement. Do not disappoint me. With that, the emperor turned and left, his guards following. The silver advisor shot David a look of pure hatred before storming out. Soon, only David and Copperval remained in the chambers. The prince sank back down to the floor, exhausted from standing. But his eyes were clearer than they had been before. You really think you can teach me to bake? I know I can. The question is whether you are willing to learn. It is harder than you think. Your claws will get burned. Your scales will get covered in flour. You will make mistakes. Lots of them. David smiled. But if you stick with it, you will create something beautiful. Something that matters. Like the cakes you made for me. Exactly like that. Copperval was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Thank you, David, for seeing what no one else saw, for understanding what I could not explain even to myself. That is what bakers do, David said. We pay attention. We notice when someone needs comfort. And we try to help, even when we are not sure how. He stood and stretched. Get some rest. Tomorrow morning comes early, and I will not go easy on you just because you are royalty. The prince's laugh was weak, but it was genuine. I would not expect you to. As David left the chambers and walked back through the palace corridors, he felt the weight of what he had agreed to settle on his shoulders. He was going to live in an alien city, teach a dragon prince to bake, and try to change an entire culture's relationship with grief. That IT was completely insane. But as his grandmother used to say, the best things in life usually were. 6 months later, David stood in his bakery watching Prince Copperval pull a tray of star cakes from the oven. The dragon moved with practiced ease now, his claws careful despite their size. Flour dusted his copper scales, and there was a burn mark on his left foreleg from where he had gotten careless with the oven door last week. These look good, David said, inspecting the cakes. The gold leaf stars are centered properly. The honey glaze is even. You're getting better at this. I have a demanding teacher, Copperval replied, but there was warmth in his voice. The prince had changed dramatically over the past months. His scales shone with health. His eyes were bright. He still grieved for Silveron, but the grief no longer consumed him. It had become part of him, carried with honor rather than hidden in shame. The bakery had changed too. What started as a simple shop had become something more. Word spread through the imperial capital about the place where you could come to remember the dead, where food carried meaning, where grief was not shameful but honored. The first customers had been curious onlookers, dragons who came to see the human baker and the prince who worked beside him. But then a mother came in who had lost her hatchling to illness. Then a soldier who had lost his squad mate in battle. Then an elderly dragon who had lost his mate of 2 centuries. Each one received food made with intention. Cakes with silver for remembrance. Bread with copper for friendship. Pastries with gold for honor. And always the honey from earth, bringing sweetness to bitter memories. The door chimed. David looked up to see a young dragon enter, her green scales dull with stress. She hesitated in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Welcome," David said gently. "Come in. You are safe here." The dragon approached slowly. "I heard that this is a place where you can talk about those you have lost." "It is," Copperval said, setting down his tray. "Who are you remembering today?" "My brother. He died 3 months ago in an accident. Everyone tells me I should be over it by now, that I should be strong. But her voice broke. "I cannot stop missing him." David pulled out a chair. "Seat. Tell us about your brother." "What was his name?" "Ironval. He loved to fly through storm clouds. Said the lightning made him feel alive." The young dragon sat, and tears began to fall. "I know I am weak for crying. I know dragons should not." "You are not weak," Copperval said firmly. "You are grieving. There is a difference." He glanced at David. "Someone taught me that, and it saved my life." Over the next hour, the young dragon talked about her brother. David and Copperval listened, asked questions, and eventually presented her with cakes made to honor Ironval's memory. Storm gray icing for the clouds he loved, silver dust for remembrance, and honey to represent the joy he had brought to her life. When she left, she was still sad, but she was no longer alone in her sadness. "That is the 5th one this week," Copperval said as he cleaned the counter. "More dragons are coming. More are willing to admit they hurt." "Change takes time," David said, "but it is happening. One person at a time, one memory at a time." The door opened again. This time, it was Emperor Brasthar himself. The massive dragon had to duck to fit through the entrance, and his presence filled the small bakery. But he had been coming regularly over the past months, always late at night when the shop was closed. "Father," Copperval said, surprised, "I thought you were meeting with the ambassadors from the Centauri cluster." "The meeting ended early. I wanted to speak with both of you." The Emperor settled himself carefully in the corner where David had reinforced the floor to handle his weight. "I have been watching what you have built here. This place, this idea, and I have decided something." David felt his stomach tighten with worry. "Your Majesty, I am making an imperial decree. Every major city in the Empire will have a bakery like this one, a place dedicated to honoring memory and processing grief. We will train dragons in the techniques David has taught. We will make grief something to be acknowledged rather than hidden." The Emperor looked at his son. "You will oversee this initiative, Copperval. It will be your responsibility to ensure that what you learned here spreads throughout our culture." The prince's eyes widened. "Father, I am honored, but I'm still learning. There is so much David has not yet taught me." "Then you will continue learning, but you will also begin teaching others." The Emperor's gaze shifted to David. "As for you, human baker, I have a question. The 3 months I agreed to have become 6. Your apprentice has learned what you set out to teach him. You could return to your colony now, to your old life. Why do you stay?" David considered the question carefully. He thought about the young dragon who had just left, about the dozens of others who had found comfort in this place. He thought about Copperval, who had become not just an apprentice, but a friend. He thought about the work they were doing, changing hearts and minds one pastry at a time. "Because this matters," David said finally. "When I was just a baker on Redstone, I made food that filled stomachs. Here, I make food that heals souls. I thought I was content before, but I was not. I was just comfortable. There is a difference." The Emperor nodded slowly. "You have done something remarkable here, David Coleman. You came to my empire offering nothing but bread and empathy. And somehow, with those simple tools, you have begun to reshape our entire culture." He paused. "I do not understand humans. Your species is weak by our standards. You have no natural weapons, no automotive no ability to breathe fire. And yet you survive. You thrive. You spread to worlds across the galaxy. Today, I finally understand why." "Why?" David asked. "Because you understand something we forgot. Strength without compassion is brittle. It breaks under pressure. But strength combined with the courage to feel, to hurt, to heal." The Emperor looked at his son. "That kind of strength is unbreakable." Copperval moved to stand beside David, and David noticed that the dragon no longer towered over him with intimidation. Instead, they stood together, teacher and student, friends who had learned from each other. Silver Star Bakery will remain open, the emperor continued, but it will become the first of many, the training ground for those who will carry this mission forward. And you, David, will have a new title, Keeper of Memory, first teacher the new way. David wanted to laugh at the grandiose title, but he saw the seriousness in the emperor's eyes. This was not just about baking anymore. It was about changing how an entire civilization dealt with loss. I accept, David said. On one condition. The emperor raised his head, surprised. You dare to make conditions with me still? Just one. Every baker we train, dragon or otherwise, must understand this. We do not do this for glory or recognition. We do this because someone, somewhere, is hurting, and they deserve comfort. That is the only thing that matters. Not profit, not fame, just the knowledge that we help someone survive another day. Harassed studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the emperor bowed his head in respect. Agreed. That night, after the emperor left and Copperval returned to the palace, David sat alone in his bakery. Through the window, he could see the lights of the imperial capital stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, dragons were sleeping. Some were grieving. Some were remembering loved ones they had lost. Some were learning, slowly, that it was okay to hurt. David thought about his grandmother, who had taught him that bakers feed more than bodies. She had been right, but she had never imagined how far that lesson would reach. She had never dreamed that her grandson would bring comfort food to dragons, that he would teach an empire to grieve. On the counter sat a small cake, one he had made just for himself. Silver for remembrance, honey for sweetness, and a single gold star on top. I wish you could see this, grandmother, David said quietly to the empty room. I wish you could see what your lessons have become. The oven ticked as it cooled. Outside, the city hummed with life. And in a small bakery in the heart of the Draconis Empire, a human sat surrounded by the smell of bread and honey, knowing that tomorrow would bring more people who needed comfort, more chances to help, more opportunities to prove that sometimes the smallest gestures matter most. He had come here to save one prince. Instead, he had started a revolution, not with weapons or technology, but with empathy, understanding, and star-shaped cakes that tasted like memory. And as his grandmother had always said, that was the real magic of baking. Not the recipes or the techniques, but the love baked into every bite. The care that said, without words, you matter. Your pain matters. Your memories matter. You matter. David stood and began preparing dough for tomorrow. The work was never finished. There would always be someone who needed comfort, someone who needed to be reminded that grief honored is grief survived. And he would be there, flour on his hands and hope in his heart, ready to feed them.